Winged Hussars and Baltic Wars, the Livonian War unleashed. What do you get when a czar with a temper, a king with a crown complex, and a duke with a grudge all decide they want the same icy slice of Europe? Welcome to the Livonian War, where the Baltic wasn't just cold. It was boiling with ambition, betrayal, and cavalry charges so thunderous they could wake the dead. How did Ivan the Terrible turn a trade dispute into a full-blown war? Why did Sigismund III fight tooth and saber to reclaim a throne he'd already lost? And how did a teenage Gustavus Adolphus inherit 3 wars and still manage to become one of the greatest military minds in history? From Kokenhausen's cavalry carnage to Kircholm's legendary ambush, this is the story of how Eastern Europe became a chessboard of empires, and how one man, Jan Karol Chodkiewicz, turned battlefield trickery into high art. This isn't just history. It's a saga of feathers, firepower, and royal fury. So buckle up as we dive into this amazing adventure. Once upon a time in the frosty corridors of the Kremlin, Tsar Ivan IV, better known as Ivan the Terrible, and not because he was bad at parties, decided he wanted beachfront property. Specifically, he wanted access to the Baltic Sea, and Livonia looked like a prime piece of real estate. Livonia, a patchwork of bishoprics and knightly orders, was like a medieval HOA with too many squabbling neighbors and not enough swords. Ivan kicked off the Livonian War in 1558 by storming into Narva and Dorpat, modern-day Estonia, scattering the Livonian Confederation like chess pieces in a tavern brawl too. This bold move triggered a Baltic free-for-all. Poland-Lithuania joined in to protect their interests. Sweden and Denmark-Norway jumped in like nosy neighbors with armies. The Livonian Order dissolved in 1561, handing out its lands like party favors. Estonia to Sweden, Kircholm to Poland, and Ussel to Denmark. Ivan's early success turned sour as internal Russian chaos brewed. Enter Stephen Báthory, the Polish king who turned the tide with a series of campaigns, culminating in the Siege of Pskov. By 1582, Russia had lost its Baltic dreams in the Truce of Jamzapolski, and Sweden sealed the deal with the Truce of Plussa in 1583. Fast forward to 1599. Sigismund III Vasa, a man with more titles than a Netflix series, King of Poland, Grand Duke of Lithuania, and King of Sweden, was having a rough time. His uncle, Charles of Södermanland, decided family reunions were overrated and deposed Sigismund from the Swedish throne. Charles would later become Charles X of Sweden, but Sigismund wasn't ready to hand over the crown like a polite monarch. Oh no, he wanted it back. In February 1600, Sigismund claimed Estonia for the Commonwealth, essentially saying, "This is mine now," and started planning a blockade. War was inevitable, and Livonia was about to become the stage for a dynastic grudge match. Charles, not one to wait for a formal invitation, marched into Livonia with 14,000 men in August 1600. He captured Pernu and Tartu, flexing hard while the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was still fumbling with its war budget. But Charles had only defeated local militias. Enter Krzysztof Radziwiłł, aka the Thunderbolt, who arrived in spring 1601 with a real army and promptly flipped the script. Wenden fell to the Commonwealth, and Sigismund finally convinced the Sejm to open the war chest. In March, the Swedes laid siege to Kokenhausen. They took the town but couldn't crack the castle. Then came Radziwiłł and Chodkiewicz, the Commonwealth's dynamic duo. Hold up, before we charge into the next battle like a winged hussar at full gallop, let's make sure you're armed with the best history content on the internet. If you're enjoying this saga of sabers, strategy, and royal drama, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, follow our channel, and click the notification bell so you never miss another twist in the tale. Trust me, the next chapter is even more explosive, and you'll want front row seats. On June 23rd, the Swedes sent a relief army under Carl Gyllenhielm. The battle began with Finnish cavalry attacking Lithuanian horsemen. Things looked good for Sweden, until the winged hussars arrived like medieval superheroes. On both flanks, the hussars smashed through, sending Swedish cavalry fleeing. The infantry held briefly but collapsed under the combined assault of hussars, infantry, and artillery. Despite being outnumbered, the Commonwealth won decisively. Military historians like Robert Frost hail this as one of the greatest victories of the winged hussars. Charles, realizing he couldn't handle Zamoyski's 12,000-strong army, retreated but fortified key positions. Zamoyski didn't chase. He laid siege to Wolmar and Felin, recovering most of Livonia except Reval, Pernu, Haapsalu, Narva, and Tartu. When Zamoyski fell ill, Chodkiewicz took over and captured Tartu in April 1603. Charles was now clinging to a few Baltic crumbs. In September 1604, Swedish commander Arvid Stolarm laid siege to Payday with 6,000 men. Chodkiewicz arrived with just 2,300 soldiers. The Swedes expected a frontal cavalry charge and positioned their weaker units near marshes. Chodkiewicz, ever the tactician, attacked the unprotected left flank instead. The German riders were crushed, their infantry routed after their Spanish commander was killed. The Swedes were pushed into the swamp, and 3,000 of 5,000 men perished. Another total defeat for Charles. Charles, now officially King Charles IX, wasn't done. The Swedish Riksdag gave him a fat budget to hire 9,000 mercenaries. In 1605, 2 Swedish armies landed in Estonia. One under Anders Lennartsson near Reval. Another under Frederick Joachim Mansfeld near Daugavgreva. Mansfeld failed to take the town and moved on to Riga, a vital Baltic port. But Chodkiewicz was already on the move to relieve the city. And just when things couldn't get more dramatic, Charles himself was approaching from Pernu with another 5,000 men. The stage was set for yet another clash in this never-ending Baltic soap opera. It was a crisp Baltic morning when Jan Karol Chodkiewicz, the Commonwealth's hetman and part-time magician of military tactics, decided to pull a fast one. With Charles IX of Sweden breathing down his neck and Riga under siege, Chodkiewicz did what any brilliant commander would do. He turned his back and rode away. But this wasn't cowardice. It was bait. Charles, ever the ambitious monarch, saw Chodkiewicz's retreat and thought, "Aha, gotcha." He left 3,000 men to keep the siege of Riga warm and chased the Polish army down the Dwina River with 11,000 troops, determined to crush them once and for all. On 27th of September, Charles caught up near Kircholm, a sleepy town about to become legendary. Charles had studied Polish tactics like a student cramming for finals. He knew the Commonwealth loved to smash his cavalry, then mop up his infantry like spilled beer. So, he set up a formation that screamed, "Not today. Winged weirdos." He positioned his army in 4 lines between the Dwina River and a wooded hill, the medieval equivalent of a choke point. Infantry in the 1st and 3rd lines, cavalry in the 2nd and 4th. The horsemen had room to charge and retreat through the infantry like a deadly game of peekaboo. It was a clever setup. Gustavus Adolphus would later use similar tactics. Charles was confident. After all, Chodkiewicz had only 3,600 men. What could go wrong? Chodkiewicz, however, was not just a commander. He was a battlefield illusionist. He set light cavalry to skirmish, making noise but not committing. He closed ranks to make his army look even smaller. After 4 hours of this dance, he pretended to retreat. Charles, thinking he'd scared off the Polish, ordered his 2nd-line cavalry to the flanks and his 1st-line infantry to advance. And that's when Chodkiewicz said, "Checkmate." The Polish hussars, those glorious warriors with wings on their backs and thunder in their hooves, wheeled around and charged. They smashed into the advancing Swedish infantry like a battering ram dipped in elegance. Yes, they suffered losses, up to 50% of their horses, but the riders pressed on. They broke through the Swedish pike squares, causing chaos and confusion. Meanwhile, Polish infantry engaged in a firefight. 900 to 1,200 horsemen charged the Swedish cavalry on both flanks. The Swedes panicked and fled, dragging disorder behind them like a bad smell. The 3rd line of Swedish infantry, now exposed and disoriented, faced the full wrath of the Commonwealth. The winged hussars, infantry, and artillery converged. The Swedish squares tried to hold, but it was like trying to stop a tsunami with a broomstick. The burghers of Riga, tasked with burying the dead, counted 8,900 Swedish corpses. That's 80% of Charles's army, wiped out in a single afternoon. Charles himself barely escaped, fleeing to his fleet like a man who'd just seen a ghost riding a horse. Kircholm, like Kokenhausen, became a shrine to the power of the winged hussars. Now let's sip some historical tea. Western Europe, with its growing love for pikes and firearms, began to see cavalry as outdated. "Infantry is the future," they said. "Cavalry is so last century." But the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth begged to differ. Their cavalry-centric warfare wasn't just effective, it was spectacular. The winged hussars weren't relics. They were shock troops, psychological weapons, and battlefield legends. Kircholm proved that, in the right hands, cavalry could still dominate, even against modern formations. And yes, some Western historians scoffed, but the Commonwealth didn't care. They had wings, sabers, and a legacy carved into Baltic soil. After the dust settled at Kircholm, the battlefield was littered with Swedish regrets and Polish glory. The winged hussars, those feathered avatars of doom, had turned the tide with their thunderous charge. But was it really all about the cavalry? Polish historians say, absolutely. Our hussars danced circles around the Swedes. Western historians counter, hold your horses, literally. The hussars didn't break the pike squares directly. They just routed the cavalry and then had time to mop up the infantry. So, the debate rages on like a medieval Twitter feud. But one thing is clear, Kircholm was a major Polish victory, and the hussars earned their place in the pantheon of battlefield legends. Just when the Commonwealth could have pressed its advantage, Sigismund III decided to stir the political pot. He tried to reform the Polish constitution, which went about as well as telling nobles they couldn't wear fur. The result? A rebellion that lasted until 1607, tying up resources and attention. Meanwhile, Chodkiewicz, the hero of Kircholm, was left juggling flaming swords with no gloves. His soldiers deserted due to unpaid wages. He was left with a handful of mercenaries funded from his own pocket, because apparently, heroism doesn't come with a reimbursement plan. Yet, against all odds, he held Livonia. The Swedes, licking their wounds, stayed quiet, until they didn't. In 1608, Sweden returned with a vengeance under Frederick Joachim Mansfeld. They retook Piteå, assaulted Riga, and captured Daugavgriva, Kokenhausen, and Fellin. The Commonwealth, still recovering from its internal drama, finally approved funds in 1609. Chodkiewicz sprang into action like a man who'd been waiting to punch someone for 3 years. He seized Pärnu. Then, in the night of March 23 to 24th, he defeated the Swedish flotilla in the Battle of Salis, a naval ambush that left Swedish ships bobbing like corks in a storm. Later that year, Mansfeld tried to resupply Daugavgriva without engaging in battle. Chodkiewicz, ever the tactician, set a trap worthy of a spy novel. He left his camp seemingly undefended, hiding his troops in nearby woods. The Swedes, thinking they'd found an easy target, attacked. Suddenly, Lithuanian cavalry burst out of the trees like a medieval horror movie. Mansfeld's army was devastated, caught in a whirlwind of sabers and hooves. The Commonwealth had turned the tables once again. While Livonia simmered, the geopolitical pot boiled over. In April 1611, Denmark-Norway declared war on Sweden, the Kalmar War, over a disputed Norwegian territory. Charles X was caught off guard. His army was scattered across Muscovy and Livonia, and Christian IV's fleet was vastly superior. Sweden was blockaded, and Kalmar Castle, the pride of Swedish fortifications, surrendered in September. Then came tragedy. Charles IX died, having suffered a stroke in 1609. Sweden was at its lowest ebb. The crown passed to Gustavus Adolphus, just 16 years old, and placed under the guidance of Axel Oxenstierna. At first, Gustavus had about as much authority as a royal intern. But the two formed what historian Michael Roberts called one of the great historic collaborations. Gustavus faced a triple threat: war with Denmark on Swedish soil, conflict with Poland and Livonia, rising tensions in Muscovy, the Ingrian War. Fortunately, a truce with the Commonwealth over Livonia, since 1611, gave him breathing room. By 1613, Denmark was broke and agreed to peace. By 1617, Muscovy also signed a treaty. They renounced claims to Livonia, surrendered Kircholm and Ingria to Sweden. Sweden gave up Novgorod and the Arctic coast. Just when Sweden needed a nap, the truce with Poland broke. The Polish-Swedish struggle for Livonia was about to erupt once more. If you loved this epic dive into royal rivalries and battlefield brilliance, subscribe now, follow us, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another thrilling story. We've got more wars, more intrigue, and more jaw-dropping history coming your way. Keep checking in.